Colorado Territory, 1886. Ethan Walker had crossed flooded rivers, hunted outlaws through snowstorms, and survived winters that buried entire ranches beneath ice. But nothing, not one dangerous trail or gunfight, prepared him for the quiet sentence spoken by a lonely woman standing beside a broken wagon. "If you're only helping because you pity me," she said softly, "please keep riding." Those words stopped him harder than a loaded revolver ever could. The afternoon wind swept across the cottonwoods as Ethan tightened the reins of his horse. The wagon wheel had snapped clean in half, leaving the woman stranded miles from the nearest town. Two frightened horses pawed at the dirt while a little girl, no older than 7, clutched a rag doll from the wagon seat. Most travelers had already passed without stopping. Ethan could see the wheel tracks where at least 3 wagons had gone around them. He removed his hat. "I didn't stop because I felt sorry for you." The woman studied him carefully. "Then why did you stop?" He looked at the frightened child. "Because someone should." For several seconds neither of them spoke. Finally the little girl climbed down from the wagon and whispered, "Mama, I think we can trust him." The woman sighed. "My name is Clara Bennett." "Ethan Walker." She nodded politely but didn't smile. That was the first thing Ethan noticed about Clara. She wasn't unfriendly. She simply looked like someone who had forgotten how. Everyone in Silver Creek knew Ethan Walker. At 28, he managed one of the largest cattle ranches in the valley after his older brother left to start a business farther east. Ethan had earned a reputation that couldn't be bought with money. If a fence collapsed, he fixed it. If a rancher lost cattle during a storm, Ethan helped search without expecting payment. If a widow needed firewood before winter, somehow the woodpile filled overnight. People respected him because he never announced his kindness. He simply appeared when work needed doing. That afternoon he examined the broken wagon. "The axle's still good," he said. "But the wheel's finished." Clara folded her arms. "I know. The nearest carpenter? 20 miles. And you're planning to walk?" "I don't have another choice." Ethan glanced toward the gathering clouds. "No." She frowned. "No. You'll stay at Miller Ranch tonight." "I don't accept charity." "It isn't charity." "What is it?" A neighbor refusing to leave another neighbor on the side of the road. Her expression softened just enough to reveal exhaustion hiding beneath determination. After a long silence, she nodded once. "Just one night." The Miller Ranch sat beside rolling grasslands where the mountains stretched blue across the horizon. Old Samuel Miller welcomed them without asking unnecessary questions. That was one thing Ethan appreciated about the old rancher. Samuel believed every stranger carried a story. If they wanted to tell it, they would. If not, supper still waited on the table. That evening, Clara helped wash dishes despite Samuel insisting she rest. Her daughter, Lily, laughed for the first time when Samuel's old sheepdog stole a biscuit from beneath the table. Ethan watched quietly. Children usually laughed easily. Lily laughed like someone remembering how. There was a difference. Later, after sunset painted the sky orange, Ethan found Clara sitting alone on the porch. "You should get some sleep," he said. "So should you. I've slept in worse places." She looked toward the open fields. "I used to think hard work solved everything." "It solves most things." "Not all." Her voice carried the weight of years instead of months. Ethan didn't ask questions. Experience had taught him something important. People carrying heavy grief rarely needed advice. They needed someone willing to sit beside them without demanding explanations. So he sat. For several minutes, only crickets filled the silence. Finally, Clara spoke. "My husband died last winter." Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon. "I'm sorry." "He wasn't sick." She swallowed hard. "He went into town during a blizzard to bring medicine home for Lily." Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "He never came back." The words drifted into the evening air before disappearing with the wind. Ethan understood loss. His own father had died beneath a collapsing barn when Ethan was only 16. People had offered speeches. None of them helped. What helped was the neighbor who quietly repaired the roof without saying a single comforting word. Sometimes kindness looked like silence. "I've been trying to keep the farm," Clara continued. "But every month something else breaks." "The roof." She nodded. "The fence." Another nod. "The horses. They're getting old. And now the wagon." She laughed bitterly. "I think the Lord's trying to tell me something." What do you think he's saying? She looked at him. I honestly don't know anymore. The next morning Ethan rode into Silver Creek before sunrise. By noon he returned with a newly built wagon wheel balanced behind his saddle. Clara stared at it. You bought this. I paid Henry Collins to make it. I can't afford that. I didn't ask you to. She shook her head immediately. No. I'm not taking something I didn't earn. Ethan smiled for the first time. Good. She blinked. What? The barn at Miller Ranch needs repainting. She frowned. So you work. I work. I pay you. And the wheel comes out of your wages. She stared at him for several seconds before something unexpected happened. She laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't carefree. But it was real. You planned that answer before I asked, didn't you? Maybe. You are unbelievably stubborn. I've been called worse. For the first time since meeting her, Clara's guarded eyes carried the smallest spark of warmth. Neither of them noticed Samuel Miller watching from the barn doorway. The old rancher smiled beneath his gray beard. Then he quietly muttered to himself, Funny how the good Lord sends help. He just never sends it the way people expect. Neither Ethan nor Clara realized that someone else had watched the entire conversation from across the road. A wealthy landowner named Victor Grayson sat atop his horse with narrowed eyes. Months earlier he had offered to buy Clara's struggling farm for almost nothing. She had refused. Now, seeing Ethan step into her life, Victor understood something dangerous. If someone helped Clara save her land, his own plans would be ruined. And Victor Grayson had never accepted losing without making someone pay for it. Victor Grayson had spent years believing that every problem in Silver Creek could be solved with enough money. When money failed, he used fear. And when fear failed, he created trouble until people surrendered. Watching Ethan Walker repair Clara Bennett's wagon was the first time Victor had felt uncertain in a very long while. He turned his horse around without saying a word. But the cold look in his eyes promised one thing. He wasn't finished. Over the following weeks, Ethan visited Clara's small farm almost every Saturday. Not because she asked. She rarely did. He came because every visit revealed another job waiting to be done. A broken fence became a repaired pasture. A leaking roof became a dry kitchen. Old gates that barely moved swung open smoothly after an afternoon of work. Clara insisted on paying for everything. Whenever Ethan refused, she found another way. She baked fresh bread for the ranch hands. She mended torn saddle blankets. She even repaired Samuel Miller's curtains after learning his late wife had sewn the originals years before. I don't like owing people, she once admitted. Ethan smiled. Then I guess we're even. We're not. You fed half the valley with your pies. That's different. No. He looked around the freshly repaired barn. It's exactly the same. For the first time in years, the Bennett farm no longer looked abandoned. Flowers appeared beneath the porch. The pasture slowly filled with healthy grass again. Even little Lily began running across the fields instead of hiding behind her mother's skirt. Hope had returned so quietly that none of them noticed when it arrived. One cool October morning, Ethan found Clara staring across the eastern pasture. What happened? He asked. She pointed silently. Nearly 40 feet of fencing had been smashed during the night. 3 calves had wandered into the hills. Fresh horse tracks covered the ground. Ethan crouched beside them. These weren't wild horses. Clara looked at him. You think someone did this? He nodded slowly. The cuts are too clean. Neither of them spoke the name they were both thinking. Victor Grayson. By sunset, Ethan and several neighboring ranchers had recovered every missing calf. But the message was clear. Someone wanted Clara to fail. 2 days later, Victor finally appeared. He rode through the front gate wearing an expensive black coat and the confident smile of a man who expected people to obey him. Mrs. Bennett, he called. I came to make one final offer. Clara stepped onto the porch. I'm not selling. You haven't heard the price. I don't need to. Victor glanced toward Ethan, who was repairing the fence nearby. So this is your new business partner? No, Ethan answered calmly. I'm just helping a neighbor. Victor laughed. Nobody helps for free. Ethan leaned against the fence post. Maybe that's the difference between us. For a moment, silence settled over the farm. Victor's smile disappeared. You'll regret interfering. Ethan met his eyes without flinching. I've been threatened by better men. Victor pulled sharply on his reins and rode away, leaving dust swirling behind him. Lily watched from the porch. Mama? Is he a bad man? Clara knelt beside her daughter. No. He's just forgotten how to be a good one. Winter arrived early. Heavy snow covered the valley, making travel difficult. One freezing evening, Samuel Miller burst through Ethan's ranch door. The Bennett barn's on fire. Ethan didn't wait for another word. Within minutes, half the valley rode through the snow carrying buckets, blankets, and tools. Flames climbed into the night sky. The old barn groaned as burning beams collapsed inward. Clara stood in the snow holding Lily tightly while tears streamed down her face. It's gone? Ethan grabbed her shoulders gently. No. She looked at him. We're still here. One by one neighbors arrived. Some carried lumber. Others brought horses. One family donated hay. Another offered nails. No speeches were made. No one asked who would pay. They simply began rebuilding. Samuel quietly stood beside Clara. Do you know why Victor keeps losing? She shook her head. Because he thinks wealth is measured by land. The old rancher looked across the valley where dozens of lanterns glowed in the darkness as neighbors worked together despite the snow. But real wealth, he smiled, shows up carrying a hammer. Clara covered her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. She had spent 2 years believing she was alone. She had been wrong. By Christmas Eve, a brand new barn stood where the ashes had once been. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fancy. But it was strong. Every board carried the fingerprints of someone who cared. That evening the entire community gathered inside the warm barn for supper. Children laughed. Old ranchers shared stories. Music echoed beneath the wooden rafters. Clara watched everyone in quiet disbelief. Ethan stepped beside her. You've been smiling a lot lately. She looked at him. I forgot what it felt like. Snow drifted softly outside while lantern light reflected in her eyes. Ethan. Yes. She hesitated before speaking. When my husband died, I thought the happiest days of my life were already behind me. He remained silent. I was wrong. She reached for his rough, weathered hand. Not because she needed rescuing, but because somewhere between broken wagon wheels, long afternoons repairing fences, shared cups of coffee, and quiet moments that asked for no words, she had discovered something she never expected to find again. A reason to look forward instead of backward. Months later, as spring returned to the Colorado Valley, Ethan and Clara were married beneath the giant cottonwood tree overlooking the river where they had first met. Samuel Miller stood proudly beside them. Little Lily scattered wildflowers instead of rose petals, laughing the entire time even the sheriff attended. Victor Grayson did not. His attempt to intimidate the valley had finally caught the attention of the territorial authorities, and he left Silver Creek soon afterward with his reputation in ruins. As the ceremony ended, Lily tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Can I ask you something? Of course. She smiled the brightest smile he had ever seen. Can I call you Dad now? Ethan knelt beside her, his eyes glistening. I've been hoping you would. Lily wrapped her arms around him before he could say another word. Clara watched the moment with tears of joy. Months earlier she had believed a broken wagon on a lonely road marked the end of everything she loved. She would spend the rest of her life grateful that one quiet cowboy had chosen to stop, not out of pity, but because kindness had always been the direction his heart naturally followed.